All right, so I have to move around. I can't stay here. That's what I was trying to explain. I don't talk well when I have to stay in one place. And so I'm going to be here and moving. I know that we've got people, well, before we go any further, I want to just say, May is absolutely telling the truth when she said, she called me immediately on hearing the news. The United Nations called like 48 hours later, and they said, we need you in Latin America. Can you come down and do this conference? And I said, no, mate, Chidiak already booked me that way. She doesn't waste any time at all. But what an honor. My great friend for so many years, and working with you on journalism projects with the International Press Institute, the May Chidiak Foundation gives me really a lot of satisfaction. It's always wonderful to see you. You're one of my heroes.
Thank you.
Now, I got to warn you, this presentation I have, I look out here and I see all these young, eager faces, and some of them not so young at all. And this presentation is really designed for broadcast journalists, for people that are in the business, young people that just want a survey of various technical aspects of what we do. Now, I know a lot of you came in here thinking, well, Jim's going to give a workshop. No doubt it's going to be on how to run Twitter. And you were all eager to get here. Well, we're going to have questions and answers later, but I'm going to kind of go through this, and it's aimed for students. It's aimed at broadcast journalists in large measure. So don't be surprised, don't be too disappointed. I've heard this meeting that we were having here today described in so many different ways in the last week that I just hope I don't disappoint some people. I want to get to the students first. Let me ask this, how many broadcast journalism students do we have here, or journalism students? And you hit all the way in the back. You have to sit up in the front. So, all right, I'm going to be talking specifically to you. And, if as we go along you have specific questions about anything that I'm talking about, you can say something. Or if members of the press who I didn't expect here have questions or comments to make, they can also. Just give us, a hands up or something as we go through it. One of the things through the years, journalists come and they visited us at CNN, and they come in and they see this huge place that operates 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, that hasn't been turned off since the 1st of June, all the way back 35 years ago. And they say, wow, if I only had these kinds of resources, I think I could really do my job. And when it comes, journalism doesn't require that. There are some essentials to journalism that are just so fundamental. You think of the tools that you need. I call them the 4 Ps, and we can go through them. Just very quickly, you need a pen, right? You need a paper, you need a phone. And he just gave it away. As I would say, what is the other thing that you absolutely have to have? And I think the most important ingredient in journalism has to be passion. I mean, if you're not passionate about this job, you should really look for another career, because you're taking up the space that might be opened up for somebody that does have the passion. There's a lot of competition. This media thing is changing, and it's changing very fast. You can track the money, and you see that advertising revenue for newspapers is plunging. You can see that advertising revenues for broadcast television are declining, steady decline, and it's accelerating. At the same time, the digital funding, the advertising money that's out there for digital, online, on your phone, it's skyrocketing. It's just going straight up. And it's changing our industry. It's making it easier for journalists, and it's making them more difficult for journalists. Now, as we go ahead here, I know it's hard for many of you to believe, but when I started, there wasn't an internet. You couldn't Google topics to get ideas for your story. You actually, I went to the library and they had this thing where you went through on microfilm and you looked up historic articles. So we go on. in any event, no matter what kind of journalism you're doing, your sources are the soul of your story. That's what makes them live. Now, it might be somebody that you just meet on the street that you interview. It might be somebody that you've known for years. It might be a university professor who's an expert, and you seek them out. But your sources are absolutely vital, and especially when it comes to security sources, police sources, and things like that. Oh, rewriting somebody else's journalism, that's not your journalism. You know, when you see somebody else's article and basically do a rewrite without going out and seeking out sources, that doesn't work. You have to obtain sources and you have to nourish them. What do I mean? I mean, you actually call them up whether or not you have a specific story for them. You're talking with them, you're discussing things with them, you're asking them their opinion on current events. You're staying in contact with them, because that's where some of your best stories are going to come from. You know, don't wait to read it in the newspaper or read it online. Be your own person in journalism. You know, there's too much copying going on already. I used to have a friend that worked for the Oakland Tribune, and we were in the press room. We used to have a press room at City Hall, and we worked together. And old Augie, he wasn't sure television was even going to make it. And he wasn't even quite sure the radio would. But he used to call all the broadcast journalists parasites. And he was right, in a way, because they stole stories away from the newspapers. And one of the things that is happening today, and everybody that's online kind of celebrates the fact that, well, online is taking over and print is dead. And I always try to rush to remind them, who are you going to steal your stories from when the newspaper is shut down? Because the newspaper journalists have a work ethic, a shoe leather ethic, where they cover the Board of Education, they cover City Hall, they do all those kinds of things on a regular basis. They do the beat work, and that's where stories come from. Gotta get some water, just a second. I'm talking too much again. All right, let's advance and see what's next. Multiple points of view tell a better story. It's just one of the fundamentals of journalism. We were pointing out on that panel we had at the Phoenicia Hotel, there's nothing more interesting than the truth. But even the truth doesn't tell the whole story, because the truth is usually coming from one side or another. And there can be multiple truths in a story that you can evaluate. And this is what's elemental for journalism, listening to all sides. And it doesn't mean just, well, I'm going to write a story, so I'm going to make a point here that I'm going to listen to all sides before I write this story. No, you do it every day. You're reading newspapers you don't agree with. You're listening to people, you know, you think they're totally wrong, but you're listening to them. You're studying their point of view. You're trying to understand it. Not just while you're doing your stories, it's part of your way of life. That multiple points of view, essential to journalism. Used to be a sign in one of the newsrooms I worked in that said, there's more than one side to a story. How many are you going to bring back today? It sort of reminded everybody as they walked out of the newsroom what their job really is about. Go ahead, Dennis. Anonymous sources. It's gotten nothing but worse, where we are using more and more anonymous sources. Sources say, high-level officials tell us, all of these kinds of things. I'm telling you, if somebody won't put their name to a comment, it tells you something. It tells you about their reliability. It tells you about the reliability of that information. Remember, you know, one of my tenets of journalism is, what someone tells you is ultimately much less important than why they told it to you. You can always get the source that worked for a company and got fired, and he's going to give you some dirt on that company. But you have to ask yourself, why is he telling me this? You have to analyze that. Politicians, the same way. Of course, we all know that whatever they tell us, we're expecting. We're not really getting the truth here. All right, let's move along. Now, this is for broadcast journalists. I'm going to go over this stuff kind of quickly, these next couple of parts. We like to start with our best video, whatever it is. Write the story around the best pictures, because that is the heart of the visual media. Define the story, outline it. You know what I tell people? When you're writing the lead line to your story, spend 1/4 of the total time you spend on a story writing that lead line. Define it. Make it work. Make it explain to someone not only what you're going to tell them, but why it matters to them. It's not as easy as, you know, I'll typically write the lead line once or twice, maybe 3 times, then go ahead and write the rest of it, and then come back and rewrite the lead again. The lead is, you know, how you hook the audience, so to speak. And this applies if you're a print journalist or if you're a broadcast journalist. I mean, getting that lead line that sums things up is essential. Bring in the best soundbite early. Now, this is particularly really for broadcast journalism, where as you're putting together the story, you are looking for someone that you're interviewing, somebody else out there, and have them to define the story as they see it, or define a controversy as they see it. And you actually work on bringing that out during your story and get to it quickly so that the audience, you know, it's not just you talking. The idea is to interest people in the story and then get them involved. Get them involved in watching it, get them involved in learning from it. Now this again, we've got some camera people here in the back. How many stories do you see on your network where all of the camera angles are right where they are right now, shoulder level? The entire story will be shot from shoulder level. Boring. Because it tends to look the same. You know, and you can say, well, that's the cameraman's job. Television is collaborative. You're working likely with a producer, with the reporter, as well as a camera person. A 3-man team is pretty usual in international journalism. There's a lot of one-man bands too, where they have to do everything. But in this collaboration, you have to work together so that the camera person, you know, for instance, covering a demonstration. Best place I found to cover a demonstration is from up high. You get on a balcony. Well, that's up to the correspondent or the reporter to get the crew up there. They make arrangements with somebody to help them get up there while the cameraman's shooting things at ground level. The idea is a variety of camera angles to make the story interesting. All right, we're going to move on now. Natural sound. The demise of the sound technician in our industry was a really unfortunate thing. Today, having your own sound technician, that's for the really big, really, you know, money-spending networks in the United States, where they actually assign somebody to do nothing but sound. But sound is so essential to bringing somebody along in a story, making people feel like they're in it. You know, unfortunately, we've had a few technical difficulties. I wanted to share with you a story that one of my colleagues, Carl Penhall, did aboard a train called the Beast. And this train, you know, regularly runs between Central America, Nicaragua, Honduras, up to the U.S. border and into the United States. And typically, scores, if not hundreds of people climb on board this train. They're robbed, they're beaten, they're raped sometimes, they're arrested, but they ride this train to try to get into the United States, riding their dreams. And as he told the story, he'd pause and you could hear, you know, the train tracks, you know, the creaking of the steel wheels on the steel rail. And it gave you that sense that I'm in motion. I'm going somewhere. I'm going towards my dreams. That was really good. But I mean, you can visualize it, how sound is so important to stories. All right, we're going to talk a little bit about one of the newest things that everybody does. And you see this sometimes on YouTube even, but it's called a walk and talk, where I'm walking around and I'm talking about the story. Now there's a lot of reasons to do it. Primarily, you do connect with an audience. because you're standing there, you're talking to them about the story. But there's right and wrong ways to do it. It streamlines the production. If I have to take a 2.5-minute package and put it together and edit all the things into it, put in the sound bites and do all of that, I could spend 2 hours cutting that package. With the very best editor, maybe I could do it in 1 hour and 15 minutes, you know, with somebody that's really, really good. And when I have a walk and talk, I can cut that baby in 10 minutes because the entire story is self-contained. And if it's done right, it'll work. The networks love it too, because it saves a ton of money and time. Now, I call it, do you know what BRoll is? How many people know what BRoll is? All right? It's from the old film days. And they used to have chains that ran through the projectors. Your A roll was the roll that had your interviews, and it had the correspondence track on it. The B roll was the picture, you know, of the story, you know, what you were talking about. And B-roll is just like, well, it's the heart of the whole story. As I said at the outset, the video experience is television. Now, there's a new thing out there, new development. It's called me-roll. And that's where the correspondent is constantly on the camera. You know, like it's all about me. Look, I'm here. Look, I'm back again. No matter where you are, you see the correspondent. It's gotten so bad, when we cover major stories now.
Should we answer your phone? Should I answer it?
No, I should have. I put it on silent. Yeah, probably. It's my old cameraman saying, don't forget it, don't. Anyway, so we go back to get some video of these major events, and there's none there without somebody standing in it. Drives me crazy. So that's something to be judicious with if you're a film student or a broadcast journalist student, because when you do those stand-ups, as we call them, the walk and talk, you can also be off camera. You don't have to be on camera all the time. In fact, that's what will give it some pacing. All right, you create movement too. When you're preparing a walk and talk, and I really tried to find this video too, but we didn't. You can actually, I marked out, I did one where I end up standing and the Sphinx is right over one shoulder and the Great Pyramid of Giza is over the other. Coincidence? I don't think so. I had marked it out, we had looked it over, and I had a rock sitting there and I knew exactly where to stop. Because you do a little planning before you do these things. And it's kind of essential, but you know, it's important to remember that kind of planning will really pay off and give you a sense of production, even though this is a task. You might finish your whole day's work in 2.5 minutes of actual on-camera work. You might end up doing it 42 times as well. Now, there's another thing I want to show you. This is really for the people that want to be on YouTube or want to be on camera. It's just a little trick. A lot of times we have to do, or I've had to do these long documentary type things where there's what we call the stand-ups in the middle, and they're long. They're too long to memorize. You know, you try to memorize it, and you don't quite get it right. It doesn't sound good. But today, with the iPhone, with the Android, and all of these things, it just gets nothing but easier. See this? Well, it's not going, since I got my phone wet, it doesn't work. But if you can see that, it's a teleprompter. You can vary the speed. You can do all kinds of things. They make holders so you can, I'd attach this to the camera. And the trick is that you only look at the teleprompter. You only look at this. You never look into the lens, and you're back at least 6 or 8 feet. The audience can't tell you're not looking straight at them. So, I mean, it saves a ton of time. It's just a little trick, you know. You thought I was memorizing all that stuff? Nobody could memorize all that stuff. All right. A piece to camera, when you're doing broadcast reporting, the piece to camera is absolutely essential because it involves you in the story. There's only really one time when you don't do a piece to camera, and that's at a funeral, because it's not about you. Give the guy his day, all right? The stand-up open, rarely used to open up a package. Again, you usually open up on your own video, your best stuff. The bridge is the most misused stand-up in all of television news. Because a bridge, if it's done right, is a transition in place or time. It is not, something that you just put in there because you say, well, I don't want to drive all the way to Biblos to get that B-roll, so why don't I just stand up here and talk about it? That's not the way that a stand-up bridge should be used. Journalists, broadcast journalists, have a really hard time with this concept of stand-ups because they want to look good, they want to look intelligent, and yet when you're out there and you're so busy doing these things, you can't think of, what the heck should I say? So people end up with a stand-up close that more or less can be used to restate the story, to redefine the story. And one of the tricks that I like to use that helps me out is there's always something that someone said to me during the course of the day, or the course of working on the story, that wasn't on tape. And a perfect thing to do in a stand-up close is quote someone who really taught you something about the story. Every story that we write, every story that we report should have taught us something. We should have learned something. If we didn't learn anything, then we really didn't work very hard and do our job. That's one of the essentials. You become a journalist, and I know these broadcast students love going to college. They love their parents paying for it. When you become a broadcast journalist or any kind of journalist, you become a student for life. Because you're really studying, you're learning, and then you're trying to share things, condense them, organize the information, and share it with an entire audience. All right. Now let's show a video. What makes a great stand-up? It depends on how they're done. Now with long lenses and wireless mics, you can do some incredible tricks where the person is standing down in the bomb crater, but you see them up close and they're talking, and then the camera begins to pull out. And you begin to see the entire scene of devastation. That when we were here in Lebanon in 2006. Let's do the Berlin Wall drive. Now, what's really odd sometimes is actually when two correspondents come together, and Fred Pleitgen and I, was Fred's idea. We put all of this, actually we stole it from Fred's father. That's the natural sound. There he is.
While the communists tried to show their superiority by building the gigantic broadcast tower on the Alexanderplatz.
Whenever I'm talking, he cut it off. You see that? No, but you get the idea. Go ahead and just don't stop.
Meanwhile, the East stagnated. People were lucky to even get their hands on the unreliable Trabant.
So I got to travel all around.
The border between East and West Berlin was sealed.
I got to drive around in the nice Mercedes that was the bureau car, and Fred loves this Trabant. Had it all painted up. CNN helped him, and so it was a lot of fun. But to do a story this way, where he's in the East, I'm in the West, I'm in a nice Mercedes, he's in the lowly Trabant, was the way, just a technique used to tell the story. And being creative like that, it's a lot of fun. But actually, this report had a lot of information in it, and it ends right there. Okay, we've got another one. I talk about there's times when you don't do a stand-up. You know what the guy said about show business? Never follow, what did he say, an animal act or kids onto the stage. Watch this. It didn't copy. Anyway, I did a story about a young man who's about 8, 9 years old, spoke very good English down in southern Lebanon, and his entire home had been destroyed. And he led us through the, the rubble, pointing out, he said, let me show you. First, we'll start at the bottom craters. He says, there's two of them. There's one here, and there's one over there. Come on, he says, let's go see the house. And I mean, he talked us through the story. And it told the story of how families were coming back and finding their homes in complete ruin. And he took us up to his room, and I mean, his little brother had a big welt under his eye because he fell in the rubble. And this young man led us through and told the story better than I could. You know, and by featuring him in the story, that's a place where you don't use a stand-up. You know, because you don't try to compete with some darling kid. You know, it's like the cat pictures out on the internet. All right.
How come he spoke so good English?
I don't know. I think he had some relatives that could speak English, but he wanted to learn English. He was a phenomenon, and actually, he got accepted into a school, a special school here, with a scholarship because of that story. It was really nice. Where are we now? This is about, we're right at the end now. I've tried to go through this much more rapidly than I normally would. Interviews, broadcast is different than print, because in print it doesn't matter where you put things. You know, you're going to just pull out from it. In broadcast, we try to keep it together, especially, I'm talking here about formal interviews. You know, you have different kinds of interviews that you do on television, trust me. I interviewed Muammar Gaddafi. Muammar was so high. he could barely, yes, he's dead. Now maybe I shouldn't speak ill of the dead. But another one, I just saw him when I was in Berlin. Mikhail Gorbachev. People go, oh wow, you got a Mikhail Gorbachev interview. Oh man, you're so lucky. Oh yeah, right. Ask the guys at Hard Talk on BBC. They explain to them, they say, now, Mr. Gorbachev, this is kind of the give and take. We'll ask a quick question. You give us a short answer. You know? And you go 30 base, explain yourself, but you go a little bit. They toss him the question, and Gorbachev begins to answer. After 8 minutes of his Politburo speech, Gorbachev is interrupted, and the host of the program says, excuse me, Mr. Gorbachev. Now, Gorbachev doesn't have to react to that. He's got that bald-headed guy that does all his translation. And he instantly shoots back at the presenter. You do not interrupt President of Soviet Union. I'm telling you, I did an interview in New York with Gorbachev. They told me 20 minutes only. His first answer was 18. You know, some people are nightmares, all right? Opening questions. Every interview has a beginning, a middle, and an end. The opening question is important because you want to put the guest at ease. You want them to relax into it because they're tense too. And I don't think you need to have all your questions written out. But you don't save the best for last. Because in a broadcast interview, what happens is somebody says, well, I'll put that zinger of a question last. And they either A, don't even get to it because they run out of time and the guest wants to leave, or they do get to it and then the person just cuts it off at that point. So my advice is, you got strong questions, put them very close to the beginning of your interview. You know, and you don't want to go on a long time either. I mean, unless you're anticipating a 30-minute interview that you want to put on air. You avoid direct conflict with a guest. Remember, you know, you're not a lying, thieving SOB. It's, you know, your critics say you're a lying, you know, put it off on somebody else. Don't get into a direct, conflict with them because it can ruin your interview. At the end of the interview, you can do what you want, but not in the middle because it'll just change the whole tenor of the interview. You try to connect the guest with the audience. Give them a fair shake. You know, you don't bring them on the air, you don't bring them into the interview to just shut them down. Give them a chance to tell their side of the story. Give them a chance to relate in one way or another to the audience. That'll be good for you, it'll be good for your guest, and it will be good for your audience as well. The last questions. You always think of something. I know that a lot of times when I do an interview where I knew I was going to be bad to someone, and I was going to really have to call them out, I'd save a nice question for last. So that, then they don't quite feel as bad. I had to interview the skating coach for Tanya Harding, the one that tried to break the knees of Nancy Kerrigan at the Olympics. And I don't know what I said, but she then refused to do any more interviews with CNN. And I didn't think it was that bad. I thought, well, no, that went pretty well. But the guests can take a lot of offense. And it's nice to kind of rewarm them a little bit at the very end. And give them that chance, if you haven't already, to tell exactly their side of the story. Yeah, listen. One of the worst things in interviews is when the journalist that's doing them won't listen. The person may have already given them the answer to their next question. Had they been listening, they would have heard that. And they just continue to move on, and there's no flow to the interview. You have to be ready to give and take in interviews. There's a lot of different techniques. There's a lot of people that do it in different ways. I can tell you that if you're trying to do an interview over a satellite, it's much more difficult than trying to do an interview with somebody you can look in the eyes. And so that's, my favorite way to do it, is looking somebody in the eyes. Because you can tell whether they're telling you the truth or not. You get much better indicators of what you should be asking them about, or you want them to fill in. All right, I think that does it for what we have. I'm sorry I didn't have more video. We had a few technical glitches. Brilliant example of stand-up bridge. But
We're not going to see this board. It's amazing.
is he on there?
We tried at Phoenicia.
Oh yeah, you did. I was going to play out the whole story. You saw him a little bit at Phoenicia. All right, I think we're ready for questions. You want to take it over?